Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm your host, Noor Kyle.
And I am her faithful sidekick, Mushtaq Ali.
Always. Well, whether you're here live or watching on the replay, we are so happy to have you here joining us for another moment together as we all just kind of gaze in puzzlement and all that is taking place around us right now. But in any case, uh, if you'd like to support the work that we do, there are multiple ways that you can do that. You can, of course, subscribe to our channel. You can like this video. And for the many of you who did that last week, so grateful because as we expected, we did get more hates on that video last
And
weekend than we
ever.
normally do. Yeah, than ever, truly. But it also got a lot of views, which means that a lot of people saw it and, God willing, benefited from it. And thank you so much for supporting us in saying things that needed to be said. But same thing goes for this video. If you could like this video, leave interesting comments as many of you did and
Yeah, we
continue
got
to do.
great comments from last week's
Yes.
video.
Yeah, and I'll be taking time to answer more myself. Um, please do those things. It really helps us out. You can also, of course, join our email list, which, as many of you know, is a great alternative to social media, though we do welcome you to join us, ongoingly on Facebook, on our forum. All of the links for these things are in the description. And we have not left Facebook. We find that it is a platform that really does not have any alternatives that meet our needs at this time, but
And
we
you
will
will find us
continue.
on Blue Sky, and we have a Discord
Yeah.
channel, which we're going to start using more.
So, we're in the flow of it as many of you are right now, trying to figure out our next best steps to keep community going near and far. Otherwise, um, you can also donate. We have several options for doing that. You can do it a one-off, you can do it monthly. And of course, if you have any questions, if you want to do a one-on-one or a two-on-one with us, you can email us and we'll send you our calendars and get you set up with that. Our prices are affordable, but we do love to help. So if you're looking for extra guidance on your path, if you're looking for support in staying awake through all of this stuff that is just so very good at putting us asleep, making us fearful, causing us to end up paralyzed with stress and confusion. We're here for you in any of the ways that we can be. So, without further ado, let's get to our topic this evening.
What is our topic this
What
evening?
is our topic this evening? Remind me.
The topic is waging poetry,
Yes, the
specifically the
Sufi art.
Sufi art of waging poetry.
There we go. Yes.
So, what does that mean, Noor?
Well, I can speak to what it means for me right now. Mushtaq and I, we are in the US. We are in California, which means that we are relatively, well, I mean, we're white or white passing, so in a lot of ways we are safe from a lot of the crazy goings on. But many of our loved ones are definitely not. And in the face of all of the challenges that Americans and people residing in America right now are facing, we are going to have to be very shrewd and attentive and compassionate in terms of taking care of ourselves and taking care of our communities and figuring out ways to keep each other inspired. And we find that art is one way to do that. And Sufis have a lot going for them in terms of being creative, in finding ways to say the unsayable and to do what seems undoable. You know what I mean? And yeah, so the Sufi art of waging poetry to me means being active through art.
And what
It's
do we mean by art?
art. Art can be all kinds of things. As we know from the Sufi tradition, it can be music, dance, it can be poetry, prose, oral storytelling.
It
It
can be
can
puppet shows.
puppet shows, yes.
There
Yeah.
are two Islamic traditions of puppets found in Indonesia and Turkey. They both do shadow puppets.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, we have somebody who's writing about that as we speak, and he will hopefully have something. But yeah, Turkish shadow puppets. Some of them carry interesting Sufi themes. Same with some of the shadow puppets in Indonesia, though they are often overtly Hindu, even in the Muslim sections, but they're a little different. So, puppetry. What else?
Mm.
That's you I'm talking to, Nor.
Calligraphy is another popular way for people to use traditional forms to express themselves in ways that speak to their now.
And how was this, do you think, what effect do you think this has for social change?
Sometimes it doesn't seem immediately obvious, though sometimes it does. I mean, murals can be really straightforward works of, shall we say, political art. But we also have art forms such as poetry that tend to operate through subtleties and double meanings and touching in on more esoteric themes that are not limited to just what we would call the spiritual and the esoteric.
Yeah. And when it comes to that, when we look at the good old days, uh, you have people like Yunus Emre, who, when I think of him as a wandering bard. And he wasn't necessarily always a wandering bard, but the idea of here's this guy with his saws who sits down and sings his poetry to whoever wants to listen, and then picks up and moves on. And probably while in between songs, he might tell a story or talk about some interesting things. Street performers. The last time we saw any street performers in the US was back in the 60s, but it's an idea that maybe should come around again. But think about that. What do we have today that's like Yunus Emre sitting down with his saws and singing a poem?
Comedy, that's one thing I think of too.
Comedy?
Yeah, like, hmm, perhaps not, you know, like you said, street performers per se these days, though, on some levels, when we see clips of comedians' sets on, let's say, TikTok or something, there is something about the fact that they are given the opportunity to speak truths through comedy in sort of a drive-by sort of way. Yeah, like stand-up comedy, Alka. That's what I'm thinking of too.
Yeah. And what we have is TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Blue Sky, places like that are the street corners now. at least some of the street corners.
Additional street corners,
Yeah.
I'd say.
When you say comedy, the first thing I think of is TV shows, and those are completely controlled.
No, no, no.
Yeah. The
Specifically stand-up comedy.
yeah, the idea behind waging poetry is that it is in uncontrolled spaces. In our description, we mentioned temporary autonomous zones, which is a term coined by Peter Lamborn Wilson, aka Hakim Bey. He was a terrible human being. We don't like to talk about him anymore, but he had some good ideas, and he studied with Sufis in Iran and experienced temporary autonomous zones there where people came together. They uh, did things as a group, and then they split apart. And the idea of a temporary autonomous zone is one that I think personally we need to re-implement. This is a form of temporary autonomous zone, as a matter of fact, because we're going to talk for a little bit, have interactions, have meaningful live interactions, and then we're going to split. And we are not sanctioned by any group or government. So, what are some other examples of this?
I'm gonna throw this out to you guys.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to suggest that Taylor Swift is a Sufi, but
Take her if she wanted to join, man.
I've been watching, there's been a short series about called The Swift Effect on NBC 10. It started off sort of early evening on Saturdays and then they shifted it to after midnight. But I watched the last episode tonight and I found it very interesting because when you talked before about sort of the need for a third force operating in our very divided country, she seems to be operating in that way. The people who were talking about her, um, really, she seems to have brought a force of kindness and encouragement of friendship that seems to be so thoroughly benign, that I was very touched by it. I actually don't know much about her music, not really listened. And most of the commentary I've seen about her has been more on the economic effects that her tour has brought. But this particular episode focused on the friendships and the kindness that she's encouraged. And I think that's a very good thing.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it goes to show that you don't actually have to be a Sufi to do this stuff. We just talk from that perspective because that's where we come from. But anybody can create a temporary autonomous zone. And the thing is that this will be to a certain extent self-regulating. Because if you're an asshole and you make one, people ain't going to show up after a while. It's one of the nice things. You get to vote with your feet. And Taylor Swift is a good example of that. Dolly Parton is another good example of that.
Their concerts, their initiatives, yeah.
Yeah. And
And
what they do with their money.
yeah, and the fan groups that develop with certain they have an ethos unto themselves which tends to reflect the culture at large in, and for someone like Dolly Parton or I guess Taylor Swift, that tends to be a positive, inclusive space where people are driven to do things like Ian said, to be kind, to be courageous, and to struggle on behalf of love and inclusion and friendship. And for Dolly Parton, there's always been that ethos of speaking out and taking action on, on behalf of people who are living in poverty, literacy initiatives, all of that stuff. So,
And we like literacy. One of
mhm.
the things that when I was a youngin', we had small speakeasy groups that would help people learn to read. And this was, I mean, this was without any religious motivation, though I found out later that the Prophet Muhammad said, it is better to teach one man to read than it is to say 1,000 prayers. So that's a statement in, um, actually, he used the word insan, so it would be one person to read. Just people translate it as man. Uh, yeah, so um, that kind of advocacy for something like universal literacy is pretty cool. Where else do you find temporary autonomous zones popping up?
M describes, I remember, and James will remember too, how back in the 90s, a group of young Greeks put on a theater, I think, or put on a theater. I think it was called Wogs Out of Work, and it shifted the migration story and the idea of multiculturalism in so many ways. For so many other migrants who were also were identified as wogs, a slang term used to describe Southern Europeans who had migrated to Australia. Yeah, that's an awesome example.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting to see how that term has changed because it used to be one that was applied specifically to Indians by Brits. And then the Scientologists began to use it uh, as describing non-Scientologists.
Hmm.
Very weird. So, some, but not all soup kitchens are places that can become temporary autonomous zones. One example of that is an organization which I believe is still around called Food Not Bombs. They used to be very popular when I lived in Santa Cruz. They would show up at some place, open up a speakeasy soup kitchen for anybody who was hungry, and keep going until the police shut them down, which would happen every time they set up. It turns out that the law doesn't like it when you feed hungry people. But while they were going on, there were places where ideas could be shared. Not only did you feed people, but you talked with them and you got them to talk with you and you listened to what they had to say. And there was entertainment. I think the first time I ever saw the Flying Karamazov brothers might have been on the streets of Santa Cruz, on or near a place where Food Not Bombs was feeding people. If you don't know them, famous Sufi jugglers. And then we have Mr. Gurdjieff. he did, his life was in several phases. Um, and one of the phases had to do with performance. I mean, what was his demonstration of his sacred dances, his sacred gymnastics, other than the creation of a form of temporary autonomous zone to facilitate discussions on the idea of awakening? He wrote a play, which we talked about a while back, called The Struggle of the Magicians. I'll put a link to it at the end of this talk. Um, that was about the same thing. It was designed to be guerrilla theater of its sort. And of course, the literature he wrote. He wrote books that were meant to be read out loud, even though it's weird to do so
These days,
these
wasn't
days. Yeah.
before.
So, how do you wage poetry today?
And we're kind of using that as a catch-all term, aren't we? Or just in
Yeah.
a
Somebody else said wage art somewhere, so I figured I couldn't use that.
well, I mean, all art is poetry if you think
Yeah.
about it. And so it makes perfect sense.
So, what can you do? You who are listening to me right now, this very instant, what can you do to facilitate temporary autonomous zones where free ideas can be shared, projects can be worked on, experiences can be had? What can you do? Amelia's in a place right now that's a perfect example from the sound of it of exactly what we're talking about. So say something.
Yeah, I mean uh it's this space is what I try to do is make it the atmosphere interesting. People talk about the atmosphere of this communal space, and just being able to marinate in it while you're doing your work is just fascinating to some people. So I like just helping build the atmosphere. So I'll just offhand say something a little peculiar. And if anyone's interest is piqued, I'll, pontificate about any kind of occult ideas that happen to be on the tip of my tongue. And you know, from there, the conversation just spirals in interesting directions. And a lot of and I mean this space just attracts interesting people to begin with, I'd say. So it kind of has like momentum. And it's not just me, it's everybody is c contributing to this like web of fascinating behavior. That's how I do it.
Okay. Is there a second step after that?
Um, maybe I don't know.
What
Maybe
if
there's
there's
something I'm
like
missing.
5 or 6 people who are really interested in what you're talking about? What do you do then?
Um,
Well, what might you do then?
Yeah, what might you do? Pop quiz.
I mean, I told people about the Nine Third Circle, if that's what you're alluding to.
No, 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 that's not what I'm alluding
I
to,
mean, thank
actually.
you, but no.
Yeah. I'm putting
Um,
this directly on your shoulders. What do you do?
um,
There's 5 people surrounding you right now, and they're interested in what you are talking about. What do you do?
I mean, I probably empower them to be able to do the same thing as me at the very least. Just, I mean, it's not about you know, I like leaving a little mystery.
Yeah. What do you think about the idea of collective work, though?
I mean, it sounds good to me.
Yeah. You
I don't
are
know.
you are a very personable individual with a, shall we say, a certain amount of charisma.
Well, thank you.
How would you use that to facilitate some of your ideas and with for people who are equally interested, but maybe don't have as much data as you do?
It's just sharing resources and everything, any kinds of information, anything that, that's helped me, I want other people to have. Um, and sometimes it's just the bandwidth of telling it to them, and sometimes it's them actually remembering what I said is also part of the bandwidth. But yeah,
Yeah, see, and that's not hard. And the next thing you know, you guys might be getting together at some obscure coffee shop somewhere in the Tenderloin and having a meeting about this and plotting the proper occult methods of overthrowing the government. Who knows? This is how movements start. Back in my day, we tried to exercise the Pentagon. It didn't work.
I could tell.
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't let us completely surround it. We were trying to completely surround the Pentagon, everybody holding hand and shouting out, demon out, but the cops wouldn't let us do that.
Yeah.
There were nightsticks involved. Government wants its demons. But thank you for playing because this is an example of what we need today.
Yes.
James,
I've been frantically searching for the book with the quote, but I can't find it. But I was quite struck by something that was said a while, or an essay that was written a while back by a guy called Matthew Bremsky. And the title was something to effect, yoga can never form real culture in the West until every yoga studio is also a soup kitchen. And he went on to talk about yoga being a sort of a narcissistic pursuit of middle class to upper middle class white folks. And one idea it's not really artistic, in fact, it's not artistic at all, but one idea that's been sort of sludging through my mind is making yoga and associated self-care services freely available to people working in activism, because over over the last 30 years, I've watched lots of ardent activists become burnt out and overwhelmed by what they're attempting and by what the weight they face against them. So it's not really artistic, but it is, uh, yeah, they can't afford or they don't have the time to sort of do a lot of self-care, or they don't perceive them. And they're starting to perceive a lots of self-care as sort of being strictly a bourgeois pursuit. So it's kind of related to this. I mean, it's not really artistic. It's not really spreading a message overtly, but it is providing services in a way that's perhaps outside the usual consumer middle class paradigm.
they're spreading a message and they're spreading a message, and I'm glad you brought this up because you don't need to preach at people.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, preaching at people is probably the dumbest thing you can do in this day and age. You need to walk your talk. And if you do, people will notice. So, yeah, if you got yoga teachers to do yoga in the park for free on Saturday mornings, that could produce interesting change because, again, it creates a bit of a temporary autonomous zone and interesting things can go on. And what the man said about yoga studios and soup kitchens is way true. As you know, because you were there with us, we were in India not that long ago. And one of my absolute favorite things there, of so many favorite things, we had such fun there. But one of my absolute favorite things was visiting the Sikh temple
Yes.
and watching them every day feed anybody who came. I mean, we got to actually go through the kitchen and they
Yeah.
have these humongous pots,
You could feel like 8 of me in them.
more than that, probably 10 of you. Yeah,
So 16 of an average person. Yeah.
yeah, a whole roll of them. And they just fed people. They didn't preach to them. They didn't ask them for donations. They didn't ask them to become Sikhs. They didn't do anything but feed the hungry. And of course, all of these people are going to come in, they're going to eat, and then they're going to hang out in this huge courtyard and place and talk and listen and learn things.
Meet each other
Yes.
straight up. Just meeting the people in your community or just passing through, but still making connection. Mustakim, did I see you unmuted? Did you have something
Yes.
you wanted to say?
Yes, I was about the puppet show of Indonesia. Yes, it's it was uh, it was taken, or they used the story from a Hindu origin as the main story, such as Ramayana or Mahabharata, and then they add some local characters and included some Islamic teaching in the story. So it's
Yep.
very, yeah, it's very, uh, what I say, they make but I think it will be challenging nowadays because people like will easily fact check the story and oh, it's that story is not original, because at that time I don't think people know much about the real story of Ramayana and Mahabharata, so can present them, or maybe people not that much.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's an
so yeah,
interesting question. Yeah,
yeah,
because as I understand it, things like the puppet shows were used to convert Indonesia to Islam. It brought Islam to Indonesia. And Indonesia is unusual because there wasn't a whole lot of fighting. There wasn't, we're going to convert you by the sword. And it still respected the old ways, the old traditions.
yeah. I think the the Islamic teacher. No, I think they know how to approach the people through the culture. But my what I was thinking is it will be challenging. Like in this age, people seems to have a oh I like it's challenging. Like if I or people try to talk about Sufism or Islam here in Indonesia, a there's a lot of uh, how can I say the people who will attack you if you say something not according to what they believe. In this internet age, people are easily like reach you, or like there's a lot of example happened here in Indonesia. Like people, they 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 doxing people if
Oh,
even yeah,
Yeah.
even if they say something wrong about
step
or
out of
something.
line and people
Yeah, yeah,
tell
yeah.
everyone where you live and like come menace you at
Yeah.
your house.
So
Yeah.
that's another challenge. this
Yeah,
time.
and that's a kind of newer phenomena that started happening more and more as more Saudi money came into Indonesia.
Yeah,
But you know the answer to that is you create new plays, you create new stories where the truth is carefully hidden in them without with seemingly without rattling people's cages.
yeah,
Yeah, and that has to happen because the powers of evil will steal every story that they can and try and make it their own. And this is one of the sad truths about this. And this is why we need temporary autonomous zones,
It's a way.
because it keeps we used to call them gray face, keeps gray face from coming in and stealing your shit. Gray face is just another term for the man,
The man,
the man.
the government. Well, it's more of an issue here because we don't quite have the same issues of for example, as you said, Mushtaq, Saudi money coming in and basically colonizing the indigenous understandings of Islam and all that stuff. We have other issues here, other good stuff going on. So, oh, God, I had a thought. Hopefully it'll come back. I'm sorry, Mushtaq. You were saying though.
I was about to say, Osama, I'm glad you came because I wanted to talk to you about what you are doing with your coffee shop meetings and things like that as
Mhm.
part of our theme tonight.
I just came back from a sema gathering. That's why I was late. Um, yeah, yeah. It's for people who are not familiar with sema ceremonies. It's pretty much people gathering, playing music, singing poetry, connecting to the light of love, being in that ocean, and yeah, yeah, these gatherings, and I didn't catch the beginning of this talk, but hearing just a little bit about people talking, people getting to know each other, and spreading spreading that light outside of the local center of gathering, spreading that truth, and experiencing reference points.
That's
Um,
the entirely the point of this talk. So even if you missed the first little bit, you got the whole thing.
yeah, yeah, experiencing these reference points, it's kind of like it's a recharge, right? Meeting with people and having these kind of experiences where people have a shared common intention of connecting to something greater than ourselves through ourselves, um, and then going out in the world and doing the work. And sometimes we enter these spaces, our light is a little bit, you know, tired and exhausted, so it's a little bit dimmed. And then somebody would have a just a little bit extra of that light. And then when we all connect to that source of light, then we all get recharged. And and that chain of light that comes through lineage and our teachers and such as yourselves, because you guys were called upon in these spaces, Noor and Mushtaq, and to have you guys there in spirit and everybody here is just amazing. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Are you reading the old traditional poems, or do we also get contemporary poems there?
Well, depends on the moment, I guess. But today the moment called for, yeah, contemporary poem. I guess contemporary. I mean, I, I read a poem that I wrote, so I guess that's contemporary. Um, and people sharing poetry from Rumi. People are um, just sharing any kind of poetry that calls for that moment. We have a oud player and a percussionist, and the oud is kind of like the grandmother of the guitar, right? So this lute,
Grandmother of the lute. Yeah.
yeah, of the lute, yeah, and it creates these amazing sounds, and each maqam, each I don't know how to translate that, but like it's specific with a particular mode. Each mode is like specific to a feeling. And depending on what the musicians are playing, because it's all improv music, the people get inspired to read poetry. And that poetry is just filled with amazing truths it just goes in, and it takes us. So it's all everything, anything and everything kind of goes, I think, w with the intention of leaning on that truth and that light. We're carried um, through that poetry as a vehicle.
Yeah. The reason I ask about that is because while the old poems are good, they show us they contain the wisdom of the ages. The contemporary poems show us that that wisdom is still alive. It's
Mhm.
not something in the past. It is something that is living right now. And that's something that has been missing of late. We
Exactly.
don't always want to look to the past when we have living poets that can express the truth of the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and people, sometimes people are inspired in the moment to express something, and it's poetry, and you hear it and everybody's just connecting right then and there. Um, yeah, like it's just
Yeah.
it's
And this, again, is exactly what we're talking about this evening. What Amelia was talking about, what Osama is talking about, these are the things that we need to encourage. And in more forms than just this, there are hundreds of different ways that this can be expressed. One of the outcomes of this is to create a sense of empathy, which you have at both of these places in different ways. That empathy is um, it's like planting seeds. The more you experience empathy, the easier it is for you to experience empathy. And that reminds me, I discovered something today,
Mm.
yesterday.
What's that?
There was somebody who was talking about the sin of empathy.
Oh,
Yeah, in reference to that bishop who called.
oh my God. Yes.
And I thought about that. And so I checked the Quran, and there is no mention of the sin of empathy in the Quran. I checked the Torah. There's no mention of the sin of empathy in the Torah. I checked the Gospels. Somehow Jesus neglected to mention the sin of empathy. Imagine that. Nothing in the Gita. Nowhere can I find anybody other than Nazis, for lack of a better term, talking about the sin of empathy. And when they want to wipe out empathy, which is what makes us human, what makes us adult, what makes us have uh, a real life in the world, that's something that needs to be combated. And the things that we have been talking about this evening speak directly to that.
That was painful to see. It
Yeah,
was, it was, I'm glad that you remembered that.
yeah, you can be pretty sure if you see somebody talking about the sin of empathy, they are not on the side of the angels. Who else do we need to hear from? Alka, talk to us.
Almost, you gotta unmute. You want me to do it for you?
Uh,
There you
okay.
go.
Okay, I'm gonna, oh man. Give it one more try, Elka. Hey, Mushtaq, you're gonna make me a host.
Oh my God, what's wrong with me? That's why you can't do this. Let me first find you. Where are you? There you are. I was so rushed to get this thing going, I completely forgot about that.
All good, all good.
Voila, you are
There
now
we
Yeah.
all
go.
and everything.
You did it! Excellent.
Well, while listening to all this, Mustak, I think it happens naturally when you are clear, you are on this internal path. I think something happens where people just come and talk to you about their deep thoughts naturally. It just happens naturally. It's not something um, that you have to work hard. You create spaces. Sorry, I have a little bit cold. So but I was thinking one thing though. I loved when you said preaching, like don't sound preachy. That's it's a very important thing to make sure you don't sound preachy. But in your conversations, and you've seen it, and thanks to you, uh, I tend to put the method to the madness of theirs. I I always start with, which is my all-time favorite thing I learned from you during India retreat. If you're in jail, what is the first thing, and you want to get out of it, what is the first thing you have to do, right? Um, it starts from that conversation. So I tried to put um, a method to the conversations instead of just haphazardly just talking about the problem again and again and again. Bring a structure to it. I've started noticing that. Uh, and also, when I am doing it, it clears my thoughts also. It just deepens my thoughts also, which I really enjoy. And it's happening naturally where now I have a set of people who have started coming regularly, and it's becoming a lot of work for me. So I've started asking them to come on Friday evenings instead of just haphazardly come anytime. They'll just like, hey, can I come just for that salsa that they had at my house? And next thing I know is they want me to cook dinner for them. I don't know how the salsa pickup becomes a dinner, uh, but the thing is that I think it is happening naturally. But what I wanted to put a very effort, at least for me when I was listening to it, was first I need to be in a stable place. Personally, it's my journey has to be still the priority. I need to observe through all this while I'm teaching or sharing. I need to be on this journey all the time. It's if that makes sense. It's
Yes.
okay. Okay.
And
That's
Being an,
how I
yeah,
you learn something very important here.
yeah. Being an active participant in a group means you are equally invested in what you're all developing together in that space. So you're not above it, you're not out of it, you're not outside the bounds of it, you're in it as well.
And that
right.
includes all of your guests.
Mhm.
When people come and they expect you to feed them and serve them, you do not have a temporary autonomous zone. The way you get that is you say, hey, I learned this traditional American thing that my teacher has done for years. It's called the potluck. Everybody who comes brings a dish, and everybody who comes commits to the cleanup.
Is this scandalous, Alka?
No, actually, it's not. I have tried it, but I'm a sucker. I love cooking. So
And you cook good. You could cook for
thank
me every damn day, and I would be perfectly happy.
Oh man, I think about meals at your house all the time.
thank you. Thank
But at the
you.
same time, remember, we didn't let you cook for us all the time. And we certainly
That's an American
you make
thing.
the coffee.
That's an American thing. You always made coffee for me. But Indian people, man, they're just too, I don't know. I have
It,
to learn. That's what I'm saying. I have to
yes.
learn. I have to learn to, there's a lot of learning for me also while this is happening. And I need to be as awake in this process and I'm enjoying that. So I'm still in the process. Hence I try not to teach yet. I first did all the knowledge, like I read and read for years. Then one day it started making sense a little bit. Then it started, like I started understanding it. Now I am experiencing it. I am, through your help, through your push, I am learning to teach in certain way, but I'm still a student of how to teach, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea of the potluck is fundamental to our particular path. Um, there's an old saying, do not come empty-handed to the house of the friend. And this means back in the day when I was young and curly haired and went to the khanera or the teke, it was understood that you brought something. Maybe you didn't have a lot of money. They say even if you just bring a leaf, bring something. Do not come empty-handed.
Yeah, or Cherie always says, our Cherie, bring an apple. If you can't bring anything else,
Yeah.
just buy an apple.
Yeah, it'll
And
go great in the salad. But this idea is something that has a lot of merit. And back in the day when I had my martial arts school up in Oregon, every Thursday was potluck. Everybody would bring a dish, and after class, we would cook and put the food together. And I had a huge table that we could all sit around and eat. And it was a thing, it was a community building thing. And people loved it.
It
And
don't need
things happen.
fancy terms for all of what this is. People can call it community care, mutual aid. All of this is important stuff to talk about. I don't know if you want to analyze it in that way, but it's the doing that is the thing. And it can flow quite naturally, as Mushtaq was saying. You come, you share in what happens as an active participant.
And share is the important word. It is not hierarchical, and you are not spoon fed. You actively participate
Yeah.
at whatever level you can. I remember when I was young and curly haired again, they were building a Khanaga at this place, a Sufi house, and everybody got together to build it. And I remember we were working on the foundation and was using a rock foundation. So we were piling, we had a trench dug out that would be around the whole thing. And we were putting rocks in it. You know,
Stacking rocks in a trench.
yeah, big old honking rocks. You've seen that done, Nor. And there was this one guy who's probably my age now, uh, so old as the hills, and he would go over to this pile of rocks and he would pick up one rock and he would carry it over to the trench and he would carefully place it and then he'd do it again because that's all he could do. And he was absolutely determined to be part of raising this building. And some of us youngins thought that, maybe he should just sit down and relax. And it was like, no, man, you got to let him do this. He needs to be part of this to the full extent of his ability. And I understand that now because now I'm the one rock at a time guy, opposed to the wheelbarrow. But
Hmm.
that's what makes real community. And that's another example of a temporary autonomous zone. You can get a temporary autonomous zone by getting a bunch of people together and cleaning up a vacant lot that's full of trash. And magical things can happen just by doing that. Not the least of which is you could be confronted by the police and they could threaten to arrest you for picking up trash, which makes
Wow.
interesting headlines.
India is the trashiest country. I'm not going there, but still. Still. But I understand what you mean. And I
And
will
if there
work
were
on that
100
part.
people a week taking over an area and cleaning it up, it would not be the trashiest country after a while. Even little things like that make a change. And it's not just a change in the external environment, it's the change in the people. And that change can be contagious. But it has to be done in a particular way. I've mentioned this story a number of times. Um, my teacher was very popular in South Africa. Um, and he had hundreds and hundreds of followers there, hundreds of students. And he was there one time and he noticed, this was in Utenig, I think, all of these groups had soup kitchens. The Catholics had a soup kitchen. The Protestants had a soup kitchen. The Sunnis had a soup kitchen. The Shia had a soup kitchen. Everybody had a soup kitchen. And so Sheikh went to each of them and he would go, and if you wanted to eat, you had to listen to the sermon and you had to be preached to. And then you could have some food. And this was true for all of them. So Sheikh said, guys, I want a soup kitchen. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to feed people. We're not going to give them a message. We're not going to preach to them. We're going to give them food. And if they need clothes, we're going to give them clothes. And then we're going to shut up. You like that term a lot. Just shut up.
Yeah.
And wonder of wonders, it became the most popular soup kitchen there. Because nobody needs to be preached at if they're hungry. They need to be fed. But the conversations that happened afterwards were quite wonderful. And nobody was obligated to talk or listen. So that's an example of what we're talking about. There is no need to preach at anybody. The best sermon, you can write this down, the best sermon is an act of kindness. So that's kind of what we have for this evening. Who have we not heard from? Nor, pick on people.
Okay. Rat, if you've got any thoughts you might like to share, or Em, I know you gave us that really good example of the uh the Greek guerrilla theater, but do you have any other thoughts you might like to share? Oh yeah. So Rat was thinking about upaya or skillful means.
Say more about that, or type more about that.
I think that is a very good part of this discussion too. Yes. Rat says, for me, when at AA meetings.
Okay. AA meetings are an old-timey form of this.
Yes. Rat says, we share. It is non-hierarchical. Very important. It is transparent. What you see is what you get. It is sustainable, which means it has the energy and the means to continue, to be a lasting means of connection. And Rat says it is peaceful.
And there are often donuts.
Coffee, perhaps, too.
Always coffee.
And those are all wonderful things. Coffee included, I guess, if you're someone who enjoys coffee. Yeah. So that's a good example too, Rat. Tea and a biscuit. Yes.
Yeah.
That makes sense given
You
where
made
we
the
are in the world.
English biscuit, right? What we call cookies.
Yes.
It's like the old saying, come to the dark side, we have cookies.
Yeah. Yeah. And excellent example. I also want to express that temporary autonomous zones are not always sustainable. That is not their most important quality, but certainly non-hierarchical transparency and the ability to share space together.
Yeah, and
Those are all
it's
important.
nice when it is sustainable.
Yes.
And AA is a great example of that. I used to go to AA meetings all the time with my brother, who came back from Vietnam and crawled into a bottle for a few years. And so um, when I was around, I would always go to meetings with him. Um, and it was profound what happened there. Does it work 100% of the time? Nothing does. Did it provide support for people to get their lives together? Hell yeah. And you can't beat that. And there were donuts.
Yeah, and people get the help they need, and then they pass that help on to others, which is amazing.
Yeah, people say, "Oh, you become addicted to going to meetings." So what? You can be addicted to going to meetings and go there and share with people and be around people who understand what you're going through. And if that's the crutch you're leaning on, great. Better than drinking yourself into a stupor and ruining your life and not being able to hold a job or feed your family or any of that stuff. So, uh, just a thought.
Hmm. James, do you have any other thoughts you might like to share?
Oh, it was a bit of a more something cautionary, just into about T.A.Z may not be sustainable. Because in Melbourne, for a while, we had the wonderful experiment of a chain of free vegetarian restaurants called Lentil as Anything. Uh, Unfortunately, inevitably, perhaps it got exploited. They relied on donations and volunteer help. Now, the volunteers got training and it was quite good food, but people rarely donated back what was the expenditure was, particularly as they were in set locations. They had their own, places of business, and hooking into that with no big backer behind you, that was hard going. And to best of my knowledge, all there's several locations. I think they've all folded by now. The one I used to go to certainly has, and it's also not being naive about who you're dealing with. The heroin addict population hit those places pretty hard, and apart from exploiting them, also made the environments pretty scary at times. I assume it's the same everywhere else. A lot of people who are using heroin are using it to deal with mental, psychological issues that aren't getting any other kind of treatment. So
Yeah.
there's the things to be cautious of, and but that's almost like me putting in a needlessly downturn on the whole conversation. I don't know.
Well, it reminds us of what we talked about in terms of adab, right? Adab, which is I'm gonna say in this context, let's think of it as healthy behavior. Healthy towards the community, healthy towards ourselves, understanding that in order for a thing to be sustainable, to be transparent, non-hierarchical, peaceful, that requires our investment. It requires us to have skin in the game.
Yeah.
And that's why we're talking about active participation. That's what that means ultimately. And so if we want a temporary autonomous zone to survive as something functional and meaningful, we have to be able to create a sense of everyone having skin in the game voluntarily. There has to be the desire there. Osama.
Yeah. I think one of the key terms also is that it's temporary, right? Like
Yes.
it, um, and I think what makes that beautiful is that there's no expectations of the zone. There's the adab of it, there's the behavior of it, but it's not a burden on the space itself. So it kind of allows for spontaneous creation to manifest in that space. And it really becomes like, um, that saying is like you can't go into the same river twice. Like it becomes like that, where these zones, even if it's created in it, that's it. It's gone. It's not like the same zone is going to be created exactly in the same way and it's going to manifest in the exact same way. Um, so yeah, that's something to think about the um spontaneous. It doesn't mean like it doesn't have intention behind it, it's full of intention, but it's less restrictions as far as the manifestation of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Just like we talked about a couple weeks ago with Baraka and making it possible for Baraka blessing, uh, the Tao, however we want to verbalize that, allowing it the space within us and around us, community wise, to flow through and to make itself
Yeah.
clearly manifest.
And temporary is very important. Back in the days of guerrilla theater, the idea was you show up at a place, you do your thing, and you disappear into the night before the cops come.
Oh gosh. I mean, we laugh, and yet in these times, it feels
It
real.
was true back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. True then, true now. James.
It's also disappearing into the night before your own ego tries to appropriate the thing and wrecks the whole process.
Ooh, damn, yeah.
That's important.
Getting back to what Neil said about dab, I mean, that's part of it. A lot of people I've known in the past have set these things up, but it's really just to glorify themselves and to reinforce their self-image,
Mm-hmm.
which then sabotages the process. So the temporary nature, if it's going to lead on to the establishing of a broader, flexible network, it can't be one person trying to appropriate the whole thing to make up for their insecurities.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly right. Yeah. And that gets us to the poetry of the thing.
Yeah, which is a good segue into the last thing we're going to do this evening, which is read you a couple of poems. We have two poems for you, both of which speak directly towards social aspects of this. You want to go first, or shall I go first?
I can go first.
You can go first.
Am I reading Kabir?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is The Time Before Death by Kabir with the English interpretation by Robert Bly. Friend, hope for the guest while you are alive. Jump into experience while you are alive. Think and think while you are alive. What you call salvation belongs to the time before death. If you don't break your ropes while you're alive, do you think ghosts will do it after? The idea that the body will rejoin the ecstatic just because the body is rotten, that is all fantasy. What is found now is found then. If you find nothing now, you will simply end up with an apartment in the city of death. If you make love with the divine now, in the next life you will have the face of satisfied desire. So plunge into the truth. Find out who the teacher is. Believe in the great sound. Kabir says this: when the guest is being searched for, it is the intensity of the longing for the guest that does all the work. Look at me, and you will see a slave of that intensity.
There you go. And I have a poem written by Rumi. It's usually called The Guest House. When you listen to this and to the last one, yes, it talks about something very personal, but it also gives you clues about the social. So here's the guest house. This human being is a house for guests. Every morning, it welcomes a new visitor. Joy, sorrow, frustration, and a moment of awareness come as unexpected guests. Welcome them and take care of them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows, sweeping violently all of the furniture out of your house. Treat every guest with respect. Perhaps they are cleaning the place for you to welcome new joy. The dark thought, the shame, the vice, welcome them at the door with a laugh and invite them to enter. Be grateful for everyone who comes because each of them is sent as a guide from afar. And if that is true of your feelings, it's also true of the people who show up at your T.A.Z. So that's what we have for you this evening. Way more laid back than last week. And I would put my link up, but I created a pretty much literal translation of the poem because Robert Bly's translation is pretty, but it left a few nuances out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we wanted to give you access to the spirit of the thing.
Yeah, I particularly like the Kabir poem. I wasn't familiar with that one, but it's so spot on.
Yeah, it is one of my very favorite Kabir poems. I would say that and one other are like, if I'm going to read Kabir, I want to read those two.
Yeah. And the original is there's less exposition in it, but it's got the same sense of pointing us towards embracing the now, getting our asses in gear and realizing that now is the time and that we have it within us to move towards the world that we want to see within and without.
And if we had more time, we would have drafted Alka into reading it for us in Hindi, because it sounds much, much better when read in the original. But she's got a cold, so she's off the hook this time.
Well, with that, I think we can go to Brady Bunch mode.
Let's go to Brady Bunch mode.
Yeah. It is so good to spend this quality time with you all in our little temporary autonomous zone. Thank you so much for that. And yeah.
Think about temporary autonomous zones that y'all can participate in. You don't have to create, you don't have to be the creator. You can just be the participant.
The active
Start.
participant. Yeah. All right. So we can wave to each other and wave to everyone watching on their replay. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll be back next week. Take care, everyone.
And next week, we'll get back to being more controversial. All right. Take care, folks.
Bye.
Bye.